Wickyung's father was talking to his homeroom teacher. Hearing how good his son was because he had won a gold medal in the International Science Olympiad, he was not on the table. Wickyong used to study at Seoul Moon Sinseo School. Wickyong was led by the teacher to launch a new class. When the whole class was applauding the doe in greeting, the junkie appeared late. He smiled and said, "Teacher, I'm stuck in the subway, so I'm late." Wickyong stood up and introduced himself with a brief sentence that gradually greeted everyone as Wickyong. At the end of the movie, the children in the class clapped again as if they were watching a stand-up comedy. Wickyong retreated to his seat, Junkie glanced at him for a while and then collapsed on the bed as if he had never had a class. In the future-oriented class, the teacher said that I heard that in Seoul Moon School, Wickyong is the first in the school, so the whole class is a little lighter. Then he turned to remind the boy to stop bullying you. Who would have thought that the other person turned his face and asked a question about why he was at the top of the school but moved back to our school? The whole class was silent as if frozen, and the teacher was reluctant to leave for the countryside. Wickyong put his hand on the beautiful hum-e that made him spicier than eating Siamese chili. After school, Wickyong still worked hard to learn more math. He left with a familiar hand when he received a message from his father saying that he was late today. At the same time, he told him to take pictures of all the math problems and send them to him. Wickyong came home and found his mother asleep on a chair. Mom asked him a few questions and then Wickyong asked if I could try my medicine. After hearing that, his mother also stopped asking again, "I only need to go to school, but I also need to take medicine, son." Wickyong didn't answer but greeted his mother and walked straight. He picked up a future-oriented piece of paper and was about to write something, but suddenly he heard the sound of entering the password to open the door of the room, so he hid it in a hurry and continued to pretend to do math. Dad walked in and asked him what page he had done. After that, he muttered about the people in the hospital that made him angry. He found that Wickyong was not concentrating, so he put his hands on his head as if pressing a detonator. Wickyong apologized and had to start over, and if he made a mistake, he was stuck again. Just like that until he did it right, he was loved by his father as if he had never been in pain and wanted to cry. After the scene, Wickyong lies on the bed and listens to it and suddenly strangles himself. He was in the middle of the music like that, screaming in silence. He was so surprised that the light was also cold. The next morning, Wickyong looked at the plane in the schoolyard. His gaze was straight but deep down was something unknown. At this time, Minsup is being beaten for not buying bread for Hongi. Hongi coldly warned Minsup and Wickyong quietly walked into class. He sat down and opened the book like that, nothing happened out there. Koi continued to encroach on the Minsup to break the last 2,000 goals of the poor friend. Wickyong glanced at the orientation paper and remembered his father's words last night. He had forced him to become a doctor, so fate was a contract with no amendments. Suddenly, Hongi climbed onto Minsup's back and made him make a horse drag through the corridor, causing Wickyong's tape to fall to the ground. He finally picked it up and stopped when he saw that Koi was violently poking his head in Minsup. That scene recalled the moment when he himself was poked by his father, as if his life was being rewinded. Wickyong shouted at the Koi in the heavy air. Koi turned around and threw a kick at him like that, wanting to let the class know who the rules were. Wickyong ordered me to pin you. After that, the group returned to class and Wickyong sat at the table. Quietly looking at the tape in his hand like that, he was holding a piece of himself that was just bold. After school, the Koi were already standing in front of the school gate waiting for Wickyong. They pushed him to a strange place and then blatantly told him to give him money because they dared to annoy them. Hongi didn't say no to his wallet. When he searched his wallet and saw that it was full of money, he found out that Wickyong was the son of a real rich family. He pretended to be kind and returned 10,000 G, but before he could finish showing it, he was snatched back by his accomplices. Hongi was annoyed and saved his number on Wickyong's phone and named him Hongi Daika. He also gradually realized that every time he texted, he had to watch and reply within 10 seconds. Wickyong said that he went to extra school, so he was not allowed to use his phone at home. Before he had time to catch the sentence, he ate the whole slap. He didn't resist, just quietly turned his back and walked away like that, leaving nothing to lose. One of those guys with a face as cold as money began to notice this attitude of his. That night, Wickyong continued to be tutored by his father. Late at night, he lay on the bed and peeled his own neck like a painless reflex. The next day, when he sat in the car, he rubbed his neck and heard his father remind him that if he didn't get good on this exam, he would have to go down to the intermediate class. Wickyong still wears his listening arms. The phone handle receives a message from Hongi to buy bread. He didn't reply to his father, nor did he react at all. Just quietly put his hands on his hand and then fell asleep like that, tired, and took up all his consciousness. As soon as he arrived at school, Wickyong was bothered by Hongi for not bringing bread. Seeing that Wickyong kept wearing his listening hand and answering in a nonchalant manner, he snatched the listening hand from his neck. Hongi understood and showed pleasure as if she had picked up a new toy. So he announced that he would always take it for convenience. Wickyong boldly demanded it because this was something important to him. But Hongi has already given you a shot, and from now on, this is mine. Refusing to give up, Wickyong called Koi back. The boy laughed half-heartedly and looked at him with excited eyes. He took off his hand and listened, got it dirty, and then told the important thing to come and take it. Wickyong walked over to retrieve it, but Hongi dropped the tape and his hand was throwing away the item. You were angry in the eyes and said clearly that I said it was important. Hongi not only didn't stop, but also stepped forward and kicked the tape right in front of Wickyong. He kept putting his hand on his head as if he was forcing a reaction, and the reaction came. Wickyong threw a punch that flew straight to the table, causing the whole class to startle. Hongi got mad and rushed to kick it again and ordered the door to be closed for private trial. He went to play duel and Wickyong didn't fit in and flew into the battle to the dock. The two guys fought to the point of ignoring the tables and chairs that were trampled like a local battlefield. At one point, Hongi locked Wickyong's hand, and he wrestled it back. The two sides took turns dominating, making the friends around them only cry out because they were too tense. Wickyong hit so hard that his throaty mouth was bleeding. Then he grabbed his head and pressed it to the ground. Then strangled, causing Hongi to suffocate in the field. A junior was about to go to the can, but was stopped by a junkie with a sober look. He told me not to interfere in the chocolate match and I am the referee today. Wickyong squeezed until his face turned pale before letting go of his hand. Hongi lay breathing like a stranded fish but still tried to look heroic. And Wickyong just coldly said that I said it was important. Then he bent down to pick up the earpiece and tape as if there had never been a fight. Suddenly, Hongi was about to turn the chair upside down, but Wickyong dodged and counterattacked with a punch that knocked him down. Unable to get up, Wickyong walked to the table with a junkie's admiring gaze. After school, Junkie came to start a conversation and praised him harshly but also warned that if he touched Hongi, his friends would not leave him alone. Wickyong didn't bother to react after hearing it. He just left silently, leaving Junkie standing and waving his hand as if he was saying goodbye to a guy who was not afraid of death. Wickyong sits on the bus. For the first time in the movie, his face smiles when he remembers the scene of being held on fire. It seemed that fighting again made him more excited than going to the good student exam. But he suddenly realized that he had gone to the station. Arriving a little late, he still crouched down to do the test as if his life depended on every word. As soon as he arrived home that night, Wickyong was asked by his father why he was late for class. He bowed his head in apology and said he had fallen asleep on the bus. At that moment, his mother suddenly turned on the TV as loud as it could. Dad still kept calm and told me, "You're talking." His mother then corrected herself with a cold expression as if she had never turned out loud. Wickyong was told by his father to take a shower and then go to school. He said he would come in later. He walked into the room and saw his brother sitting at the desk. The older brother gave Wickyong a pair of headphones and told him to listen to music with his heart. Wickyong was still frozen and didn't understand, but his father walked in, startling him back to reality. He asked him how he had done the math and sat down at the table like that nothing had happened. The next morning, Wickyong came to school and Hongi came again. He was embarrassed as if he had just been rejected by Grat because he was embarrassed to be fed onions by Wickyong. Wickyong saw this and apologized in a low voice as a way to end. But Hongi didn't care at all and made an appointment to meet again to prepare for a match. Junkie appeared awake at this time and said that I had already told him. Anyway, there are guys in woolen hats who come looking for you. He was a trembling car. People who have practiced boxing should punch with that force like a bare chicken eating the head of a bottle. However, Wickyong warns Junkie not to get too close because he doesn't want to cause trouble with anyone. Unexpectedly, he was going to the toilet when he was shaken and kicked for an unannounced opening shot. Junkie was still straight in like a spectator, but Hongi was about to punch him for fun. But the car trembled and turned to his face, saying that you were stupid, so people punched you, Buffalo Boy. Wickyong tried to explain to the trembling that his junior was wrong first. But before he could finish the sentence, he ate a punch in the face that made his mouth bleed like an unskillful action movie. Ung trembled and ordered Wickyong to kneel down to apologize. But he stood still because he didn't see anything wrong. Ung trembled and began to count to 3 with a murderous gaze, and Wickyong clenched his hands and prepared his fists from the time he counted 1. The atmosphere was tense as if the strings were about to break, when suddenly there was a teacher's voice warning that smoking would be punched. As soon as he finished speaking, he walked in, making the whole group pause. The teacher saw that the little Wikiong was bloodied, so he turned to scold the whole group like water. Then he pointed to his trembling face and cursed, from punching and kicking without knowing how to think, to the habit of making a disorderly child. He scolded so enthusiastically that he dragged his trembling mother into the story. This guy turned around and asked what it had to do with my mother. It seemed that he knew that he wanted to punch the teacher so much, but he tried to hold back. His hands clenched behind his back as if locking the mechanism of strangling himself from losing control. The trembling followed Wikiong into class with uninvited excitement. This guy keeps sitting and talking about praise. He promised to train Wikiong to become a person who knew how to resist. But Wikiong just replied as cold as ice that I wouldn't fight. The trembling pointed to the cardinal who was sitting in the corner of the classroom. His eyes were as bitter as a dangerous chili staring at Wikiong. Yet he still stopped turning away and said in a low voice, "I beg you to dodge me." At the end of the period, when everyone was cleaning up, Wikiong came in and found someone searching his briefcase. Anything comes and comes. The tape was gone and the phone was now called by the cardinal as a declaration of war. He made an appointment for Wikiong to go to the same place where he had been beaten for daring to get him called up to meet the teacher. Wikiong angrily shouted into his phone and then grabbed his briefcase and walked away like a train without winning. Trembling when he saw that, he also grabbed his socks and ran after him, and his mouth was camouflaged. "Don't run for a while, it's very disturbing." Meanwhile, the trembling voice heard the cardinal say that just by touching the bandage, Wikiong's eyes would be different. At Wikiong's mother's house, she collapsed in front of the door of a certain room. His eyes were in pain as if carrying 10,000 unanswered questions. He trembled when he found out that the tape and headphones belonged to Wikiong's deceased brother. When the two arrived, they saw Ung trembling standing on the stairs, holding out their headphones and a tape as if they were challenging the penis. Wikiong stepped up alone. Ung trembled and said that if you want to take it, you have to fight a battle. Wikiong refused, but was immediately punched in a dangerous place, causing him pain. Below, the juniors laughed gloatingly as if they were watching a play. When Ung Dong was about to give the decisive blow, Wikiong jumped up and counterattacked. The two rushed into each other like two opposite electric currents, because for him this time it was no longer defense but proving that he was not wrong. Ung trembled and knew how to box, so he all aimed at mental points that made it difficult for Wikiong to resist. The last punch caused blood to spill out of his mouth and spill his uniform. But he still stood up, his eyes red as if he didn't accept defeat. Even so, he still got 3 more blows and he made blood drip with every step. It turned out that he was fighting while quietly analyzing the opponent's position. And then Wikiong threw the first counterattack on the trembling face, causing the situation to be reversed coldly and decisively. It's true that fighting with analysis has a chance to resist any type. Wikiong launched a counterattack that caused the cancer to tremble and bleed slightly. He started the owl and flew in to hit him in pain. Anyway, he is still slightly better because he knows boxing and his physical strength is not medium. Wikiong was hit to the ground but had to breathe heavily as if he had just run on the south side of the field. At that time, he trembled while striking and quickly warning that the transfer of schools would not escape him. But Wikiong didn't bother, he slowly got up and took the next position like that with the attack mode on. In his mind, he suddenly remembered the trembling words telling him not to stand still in the punching range but to rush in and roll for the rhythm of the punch. So Wikiong tried to rush in but immediately ate a punch like heaven. He still didn't stop, but continued to rush in again and hit one more blow for enough cows. Shivering outside, he shook his head and muttered, "Oh my god, who's just like that? It's not like a stranded fish." But Wikiong pushed with all his might, causing both of them to fall down the stairs. The sound of the collision was heard in my mind, and the two were lying in pain after the fall, trembling and injured in their legs. Seeing that the opportunity came, Wikiong rushed over and hit him in the leg as if paying off the interest. Then he threw a jaw hook that caused blood to gush out of his mouth, trembling, and he collapsed to the ground and could no longer stand up. But Wikiong still didn't put down the fire, but continued to kick him a few more times, and then scolded loudly as if all the memories had accumulated for a long time. "You warn me that I've endured it and you don't know it, don't blame me." That scene made the whole group around him squirm to the fullest. His gaze at Wikiong seemed to be looking at the end. Junkie took a breath and declared Wikiong the winner, and the male protagonist dragged up the stairs to retrieve his tape. And the Hongi guy was standing holding a roll of armbands as if he was supporting his nose because he was afraid of being fed and punched. Ung trembled and was about to get up to follow him to continue fighting, but Junkie stopped him. He spread his hand and gradually declared that you lost, and then go and tie up the boy. Turning to the scene where Wikiong was washing his eyebrows after the battle, Junkie standing next to him made a few on him. Wikiong glanced at him and asked why you were so good to me. Junkie slowly replies that I'm just out of personal curiosity, Or maybe I'm the only one who recognizes your talent. Wickyong asked, on the contrary, you don't know how to fight, but you're only good at martial arts, it's really smart. Junkie also didn't just pick up the coach, he didn't need to play, buddy. Suddenly, Wickyong receives a message from his father asking where he is without answering the phone. Immediately afterwards, the call center said that he had not arrived and asked to call his parents back immediately. Seeing that, Junkie immediately agreed to change Wickyong's clothes. He also said that I used to watch YouTube to learn how to remove bloodstains, and then rest assured that I will wash it tomorrow and return it to you. Junkie asks him to eat, but Wickyong says he has to go to the study center, so he can't go. Before leaving, Junkie also gave Wickyong a piece of foundation to cover bruises to avoid confusing the person on the other side. That night, the three boys in the group sat and criticized each other for losing the battle like that, and they didn't have time to swallow the humiliation. Wickyong was in the bathroom using foundation to cover the bruises on his face. As soon as he walked outside, he heard his father scolding the tutoring center because it seemed that he had just gotten a bad grade. The echoing scolding reminded Wickyong of the moment he punched while blood was spilling on his shirt. Then, in the dream, he was called up by his mother with a voice full of shock and regained his spirits. The mother discovered the bruises on her son's body, but Wickyong only said that he fell down playing basketball. He smiled and walked over to open the curtains to catch the early light as a kind of self-reassurance. While sitting at breakfast, the father said that playing basketball during gym time must be very different from the school that is very proud. The father suggested that Wickyong move to another center because if he went down to the intermediate class, there was no point in studying. Wickyong looked directly at his father and said he would try to do better. The father laughed lightly when he heard this. His eyes seemed to have just reduced some of his doubts about the son who had been mercilessly headed. The group of volunteers and cardinals were called to the rooftop by their seniors to handle and warn. Because the road is the same as the first block, but losing to an unknown child like Wickyong is really a national shame. The whole group was beaten without daring to resist, and the purple-faced lieutenant ordered them to find a way to beat Wickyong with bricks or something. Otherwise, today the whole group is determined to go on the same trip. That day after school, Junkie is still as usual to follow the male protagonist. This time the two of them started talking more, and Wickyong was still annoyed by the thick-faced friend next to him. Junkie is still dancing as usual when he says, if you don't thank me, it won't hurt me because I still have to go back and wash your shirt. Meanwhile, the Ungjun are hiding in a corner of an alley like a nest of fire ants, waiting for a chance to take revenge. And from the conversation, they learn that the real leader is Jahook. Even though they were in a blood cave, they were still worried that if they punched each other too loudly, they would be easily transferred. Ungjun sees Junkie walking with Wickyong and is so angry that he wants to rush out but can't do anything. Junkie said that Ungjun with Hongyi and Jingu was called up by the second graders today, which meant that Wickyong would now have to face another level. But you still said, frankly, I don't like fighting. While the two were walking and talking, Ungjun suddenly rode a motorcycle and rushed over, holding a large log in his hand and smashing it directly into the back of Wickyong's neck when he had no time to defend himself. After the blow, he drove away like that, just finished a dirty task. Wickyong held his head in pain, his hands were bleeding all over his hands. Junkie panicked and called for an ambulance, but Wickyong just said quietly, don't call it, it's okay, but before he could finish the sentence, he fainted right in Junkie's desperate scream. The male protagonist remembered the scene where his brother used to be taken to the ambulance every day, but now he is just a cold corpse. When Wickyong woke up, he saw that the junkie was wearing his headset, so he immediately jerked back, then took off the water line and hurriedly ran to the tutoring center. As soon as he arrived at the gate of the hospital, he saw his parents waiting like that, knowing that he would come. Meanwhile, the young men were standing outside the gate worried because the appearance of their parents made the situation tense like a string. Wickyong was put in the water transfer again. The father walked over solemnly and asked what had happened, and Junkie quickly made up a scenario that the two of them took a shortcut, so they slipped and fell down the stairs. The father glanced at Junkie with a judgmental look like a child of such a family. Then asking him what he ranked in school, Junkie shyly confessed that he was not very good at studying and quickly withdrew from the scene like the wind. Wickyong also hurriedly asked to go to extra school, but his mother stopped him and scolded him lightly what else to study. He apologized to his parents and then ended his head full of regret, and his father gently told him not to let himself get hurt or get sick. His mother walked out and sat down with a heavy expression as if she had an unquenched memory. Suddenly, a bloody victim was pushed into the emergency room, making her feel like she was being pulled back to the scene where her first son had been taken away without having time to say a word. She sighed tiredly, the pain was still there, and suddenly trembled and asked if it was okay. She said okay, I'm fine, and then asked me if I was a friend of Wickyong. Seeing that they were wearing the same uniforms, they thanked me for visiting, stood a little stiff, and then asked about the situation of Wickyong. Hearing her say that the guy who was beaten by me was fine, he nodded and left. Before that, the male protagonist's mother also glanced at the wound on his face, but his eyes were still full of worry. When Wickham got home, Runke was in another hospital. He went to visit a friend who was kissing and sat next to the bed whispering that I had met a guy who looked exactly like you. As soon as he got home, Wickham quickly walked inside and his mother called him back to ask about school. She suggested that he take a break from school for a while, but Wickham refused. His mother suddenly asked if he was blaming her? Why didn't she share anything made her feel like she was being pushed away? Her voice dropped and she apologized to me because I understood that he was also very tired. But Wickham only said that he wanted to go into the study. He walked into the room and lay down, quietly strangling himself as a way to feel something real. While outside the living room, his parents still have a corner for each of them. The next morning, Wickham went to school again, and Junkie was still fucking following as usual. When the two of them met Jun, he asked, "What do you do when you don't have ice bands? Don't you lie still?" Wickham looked at him and replied, "If you sneak up on me, I'm not calculating. And I want to end here if you still have self-esteem." He left, and Jun warned him not to do any more tricks. But he didn't do anything more and left, making Hongi and Jingu worried because he couldn't handle Wickham as a sure death. That's right, because the three of them were called up by Jihook to fight again. The photo was posted because Jun didn't drag Wickham as he said. Jun says that he dealt with it last night, but Jihook doesn't care. He went straight to the class of smashing the table and smashing the chair of the Wickham sword as if he was competing in who caused the fastest disturbance. Seeing that he sat still and did not react, Jihook began to want to teach him himself. Junkie walked over and told you guys to do it again, and I was forced to call the teacher. Jihook heard that, so he stopped fighting and didn't fight anymore, but turned to punch Hongi because he was disgraced by such a child. After that, Jihook announces that Wickham and Junkie must go to the rooftop to meet him after lunch. Otherwise, he will not be at peace until graduation. On the rooftop, Jihook holds a stick as if preparing the last sperm and wants to punish Wickham for not answering earlier. Wickham repeatedly apologizes and begs for Junkie's forgiveness. So Jihook lets Junkie stand aside. He told Wickham to take the blame for the previous incident that had disgraced him, and then called Jun to look at it with his own eyes. Meanwhile, Junkie stood by and warned Hongi not to touch Wickham anymore if he didn't want to unload the grave early. Wickham apologizes to Jun, and then Jihook orders him to hit him. However, Jun did not move, but stood like a stone statue. Jihook gets mad and hits Jun back, causing him to be beaten repeatedly in front of the whole group. The second graders stood and laughed, and Jun's accomplices began to see clearly. Wickham saw this and came out and snatched the stick from Jihook's hand. Wickham went to ask Junkie, "If I beat these guys, how many more of them would come to me?" Junkie woke up and replied to the two of them, then confirmed that if you deal with both of them it will be over. So Wickham grabbed the stick tightly and suddenly threw it to the ground in the admiring eyes of everyone who was watching. Wickham's father is still in a meeting with the staff. They are reporting the hospital's business results. The situation is also temporarily fine. It turned out that his father called to ask if Wickham was coming for the weekend. Wickham's father said that he was too busy studying to get anywhere, but his grandfather didn't care and asked him directly. So he confirmed that Wickham and his mother were coming. On the rooftop at this time, Wickham and Jihook start to talk to each other. The sides of the rock lagoon continued and Jihook landed the first two blows for Wickham. So Wickham confirmed that Wickham and his mother were coming. On the rooftop at this time, Wickham and Jihook start to talk to each other. The sides of the rock lagoon continued and Jihook landed the first two blows for Wickham. He was kicked one more time, and as soon as he took the stick and hit Wickham's leg, he rushed his nose and muttered a few words that burned his throat and swung his stick at Wickham's head, causing him to scream in pain. Even so, Wickham still tries to stand firm to continue fighting, but Jihook has too much experience that makes it difficult for him to make ends meet. He inserted a stick into Wickham's neck and said contemptuously, "Anonymous little good guy like you, just go there." His hips were standing on the side and he was cheering to death and he wanted to punch his wife. Jihook continued to press his neck, causing Wickham's face to turn pale and his eyes to fight back. At that moment, Duan rushed over and kicked Jihook backwards. "You said that the matter between me and you was considered Hugh." But before he had time to stand up, he was rushed into by the second graders. Jihook was helped up and stopped the juniors from beating the council anymore because he couldn't bear to look at it. He declared that the first batch was about to die and then rushed to punch Wickham mercilessly. However, our male protagonist still stands firm with the glory of righteousness. The whole group watched with bated breath because one side had a weapon and the other was empty-handed. Yet Wickham still fought to the end. He catches Jahook's stick and announces that he won't buy it anymore. His eyes are itchy. He throws a long blow and then starts a series of blows, making Jahook unable to help. The last blow, Wickham punched a shot that flew a full meter, making Junkie look and want to get a replay. Wickham then took Jahook's stick and broke it in half right in front of the crowd. When Wickham started to rush in, the Junkie stood up to block it. "You said that beating the council is very cowardly. If you dare to touch it again, I will call the teacher, otherwise I will always call the police." Mr. June looked at Wickham with eyes that were no longer hateful but only respectful. Wickham went to wash his face again in a state of pink breath as if he had just run a marathon without warming up. He didn't need to go to the infirmary but turned to ask who the other two were. It turned out to be the Sungsik and Sunguk of the 3rd grade. When Wickham and Sunguk broke as if they wanted to continue punching each other for the day to get enough combos, Junkie stopped them. Mr. June looked at the other two guys and said, "Don't look for me anymore. I'm bored, and I see that this is not okay at all." You turned to Wickham and let go of a sentence. "You two play with each other. It's too childish. I can't stand it." Meanwhile, the injured man at the end of the bow politely greeted the sick as if he wanted to ask for something related to the fight. Uikom was walking tirelessly up the stairs when Sung Sik suddenly stepped over to help him. Uikom also wondered who this guy was and suddenly cared about him. Sung Sik was going to help Uikom to class. But as soon as he arrived in the hallway, he met the teacher. When he was asked, he answered calmly, "So that I could take you to class, teacher. As for adding chili peppers to the same school, we have to help each other, not make it collective." After speaking, he asked for 10,000 golf because the water was too unbearable. Uikom didn't say anything but helped the money to give it. Sung Sik took the money and left the province as if he had never appeared. That night, Uikom went to the study center again to take the test. But in my mind, I kept repeating the scene of me punching each other with the relics like rewinding memories. The test results, he got 94 points, but he was still scolded for being demoted to the intermediate level and he was not even at the top of the family. His father looked at the card and told him to focus on it. Don't be distracted. When the male protagonist finished studying more, the Sung Sik were already waiting in front of the center. At first, he also made a drama show that he was friendly and sociable and then invited the goat Uikom to come and go, "I want fight." But Uikom walked over and asked the guy, "That you are one of the other two, right?" Sung Sik asked you again, "Is he the guy who used to treat my juniors?" And then looked over and asked what was the reason. Uikom replied definitively, "Always do it here, don't go far." After hearing this, Sung Sik laughed as if he was crazy and said that if he was here, he would definitely not be able to go home. He began to challenge like that in an action movie and Uikom still stood and watched calmly. The situation was tense like a string when Uikom's father drove to pick him up at the right time. He got into the car and left, leaving the others standing out of rhythm. Your father glanced at those young men and asked if it was your friend? Uikom replied lightly. He must have seen that the uniform was the same, so he just greeted. After that, Uikom was taken to the shop by his father to sew a suit. It turned out that this week was the birthday of the professor who was also his grandfather. They came to ask the head of the Moon department to sew a suit for Uikom to attend. Mr. Moon measured and talked to his father, but then he accidentally mentioned his son. It also made Uikom suppress his smile, as if he had just pulled out an electric second. That night, Uikom was tutored by his father to study math. Then he lay on the bed again, strangling himself in a tired breath. The next morning he stood and looked up at the sky again, but this time there was Junki and some other students. Uikom told Junki about how he met a group of people in front of extra classes. As soon as the two guys arrived, they saw a happy chain waiting with a Coke bottle in their hands as if they were watching. They forced Uikom into the classroom to sit and then surrounded like that, setting up an internal processing session. Sung Chain grabbed the head of Uikom and told him to play with me in a way that invites and presses. He began to sit and talk about the fact that he was the boss of the school that ruled from top to bottom, reading his own personal history. Uikom listened to it and replied that it sounded really loud. But it was just the first child. Sung Sik scratched his head and complimented you on your cunning speech, then took a bottle of Coke and put it on your head and said that this is the drink you bought with your money. Uikom's eyes glanced at Junki angrily, but he just shook his head to signal not to act in a hurry. When Sung Sik left, Junki came and patted him on the shoulder and said that he was very good at suffering. That afternoon, Uikom went with his parents to attend his grandfather's birthday. In this family, everyone follows the tradition of being a doctor and a full doctor. There is nothing missing. Then it started the fight again. What did you do? What did you do? Like a festival to show off your achievements. My grandfather only asked how Uikom was studying at the new school and then said that the school had very poor facilities. Then blamed my parents for changing schools at such an important time. Uikiom's mother tried to speak up for her child, but Uikiom made it clear that she liked the current school, so it was okay. At that time, his father mentioned that the head of the moon department had sent a happy birthday, and his grandfather nodded his head and praised the moon manager as if the story had never happened before. After that, Uikiom sat down to drink wine with his grandfather. He said that with just one phone call, all the lines supplying goods to his father's company would be blocked. Then he asked Uikiom if he knew who that person was. The fisherman replied without fully understanding what he meant. Grandpa immediately invited him to drink. Uikiom refused because he was not old enough, but out of respect, he tried to drink a whole glass. Then the grandfather took a sip of wine and admitted that he was an abuser, because Uikiom's father used to run away from responsibility when he was working there. That is a lesson that must be endured in order to have the right to abuse. He continued to tell Uikiom to go back to study at Seoul Moon School. Just a call to the principal and everything will go away. Uikiom began to be silent because his brother had studied at that school. He looked at him and said that if you go back there, you will probably die. Then he gave a wry smile that made Grandpa let go of a sentence that your father had ruined you, right? When Uikiom went outside, he saw that the sunlight was very bright. His eyes closed, and he suddenly saw his brother appear in front of him. The fisherman walked towards him without realizing that there was a lake in front of him. He fell into the lake in an instant and then struggled in the cold water. Fortunately, his father rushed over and pulled him up. After that, the whole family began to argue when Uikiom's mother got angry because his grandfather had given him alcohol. And the grandfather turned to criticize his weak parents for not being able to teach a child to be kind. After that, Uikiom went to school with eyes that no longer hesitated. He desperately wanted to act despite Junki's resistance because he loved him and had not fully recovered. Uikiom did not accept being humiliated by the chain, but had to bow his head and retreat. So he rushed straight into his class. Sung Chain was holding a bottle of Coke to drink when he was snatched by Uikiom and poured directly on his head. The water flowed so much that he opened his mouth to grab it like crazy. He smiled secretly and said to go out and deal with it, but what are you doing here? As soon as he walked ahead, he was thrown a bottle directly at his head by Uikiom. An echo made the classroom silent. Sung Shi turned back with such a crooked smile. The more provoked he was, the more he liked it. He was about to rush in when the teacher walked over in time. He warned that if he still expelled students during the class, he would take a blow from the teacher first. Sung Shi immediately changed his face and apologized, and then punched him on the back as if no one had ever poured water on his head. He turned around and told Uikiom after going to the music room to deal with each other. Don't forget to blush if you run away. I will deal with you at home. Uikiom and Junki have indeed arrived. Sung Shi asked what kind of death he wanted, but Uikiom was silent. He turned the Rubik as if he was on the altar and then smiled and said that it was time to go to court. Uikiom said, I came to finish. Sung Shi nodded and rushed in like a beast. The battle began with a series of punches. Uikiom was initially forced but quickly counterattacked. He punched him and then squeezed his neck. Sung Chain tried to get up, and then suddenly counterattacked, strangling so hard that Uikiom heard his breath. His face turned pale and his eyes began to fade. Junki outside shouted loudly, wake up, don't collapse here. In his mind, an old image flashed when someone put his hand on it and then strangled him without letting go. He tried to move, but then he stopped, shrouding away in the laughter of the thrill. He wished him a good night's sleep and also said that he would be responsible for him. Then he turned to point at the next one, Junki. Sung Sich said that he was also interested in Junki. He followed Junki, abandoned Uikiom, and then followed his side. However, Junki said that although he was cowardly, he did not leave his friends. Then he opened his glasses and was ready to fight with the spear. Sung Chain's face was excited to fight, but suddenly Uikiom began to cough like that and came back to life. His eyes angrily declared that if Sung Chain dared to strangle him again, Sung Chain would surely die. Sung Sich looked at Junki and said, wait for me a little longer. And Junki smiled happily because his friend was resurrected. The two of them began to fade, punching and kicking with heat. Sung Si quickly grabbed him and strangled him. The male protagonist was strangled and tried to escape again. The comrades said don't strangle anymore, but if there is a mark, suddenly Uikiom has taken the leg of the object and got the chain again. He took the position and punched him repeatedly. Blood was flowing from his nose. The original Fig saw that and began to want to go in and out. Junki saw that he was playing solo and wanted to take a lotus, so he kicked him out. Then Junki announces to Uikiom that now I handle one guy and you handle one guy. The original Sung got angry and asked who to deal with whom, and Junki declared that I would deal with you. Sung Uikom came out and began to look crazy and gave the stage back to Junki and Sung Original. New Junki has punched the root fig and the chief is fresh. The two guys sat while wiping the blood from their noses and craving. The root figs were squeezed back and forth by Junki. He let the island go until Junki threw a final step that caused the root of the fig to collapse and the chain burst out laughing. Sung Si smiled at the original fig because he had lost to a child, and then he came back with his bloody face to the brim Uikom. He was hit in the head by the chief because he kept playing the game of strangling, and when he fell, Uikom wanted to strike him but he was lying under him and dodged. Then the sausage kept his legs, sat in the row and talked about playing the game of crushing the body. He pressed down and held his hand, wanting to break his arm because if his arm was badly broken, it would be very difficult to operate, and he screamed in pain and tried to get out of it. He was able to get up and then kicked the chain in the face. The chain was kicked in pain, so he hugged his face, then the Kiom threw a foot at the chain in the face and then he was stunned. Not stopping there, our male protagonist strangled until he couldn't breathe anymore and fainted. With his sore hand, Uiki hugged it and warned the third graders not to be bad from now on, and then he went out first, leaving Junki standing and laughing. When he went out he saw the plane flying high in the sky and he looked up at it passing by quickly. Moving to Uikom's mother who was going for a psychological examination, she couldn't accept that she was like this forever and then she asked the doctor to help her. So the doctor advised the male lead's mother to face her fearful feelings. So she stood in front of the door of my room and opened it like that, bravely facing reality to move forward. She slowly entered my room. The room was dark and empty, so she pulled the curtains up, then gently stepped deeper inside and saw a photo of the two brothers placed on the table. Meanwhile, Uikom and his friend Junki were standing there washing the bloodstains and using foundation to cover the bruises. Junki was glad that he didn't have to look at the sloppy Zukan guys anymore. He could concentrate on his studies without being disturbed, but he didn't say anything but just looked dimly at the sky. After that, Uikom started jogging to practice and then practiced punching and kicking as if he was preparing for something. But it turned out that it was just a thought while he was sitting in math class. He was reminded by the teacher for not doing his homework and kept distracting, and then the teacher did the same trick of pressing his head as his father used to do. So Uikom held his teacher's hand and then he started scolding. He thinks that now you are chaotic and opposed, learning is your life, I only teach. He also said that if you don't want to study, go out, so you got up and left. Coming home, of course, he was scolded by his father for that crime. He constantly shouted at Kiom. So he said, the teacher told me to go out, so I just left, and Kiom also said that my father told me to take the initiative, so I wanted to learn on my own. So the father got angry and thought that he was hiding, then he announced that he would call the center and the second Kiom had to go there to apologize and continue studying. He pointed his finger at his son's face and shouted that absolutely don't let this happen again from now on. Uikom didn't know what to say except to let the story pass. When the father went out he saw his mother standing silently looking into the room, then Kiom put his hands on his ears and once again strangled himself. Uikom went out to meet Junki who was eating ice cream. Junki asked Kiom what was the matter with him that looked so serious. But he just laughed and said there was nothing wrong, but his face was upside down and open as if he wanted to stick out. The kind of thing between me and you has just begun, and then Junki opened the phone and divided it. He knew very well that Kiom had studied at his old school, Seoul Moon, so he brought out the Zophie bank of the boy who was in the second grade of Seoul Moon School. In it, the scene of the pig bullying others was secretly filmed. The clip clearly recorded the scene of this guy pouring excess water on his classmates coldly. In the story, Junki cursed him not as much as a dog, but his father covered everything up because he was a medical school professor, so his power was not medium. Junki invites Uikom to catch the pig upside down and judges that Kiom definitely likes to do this, kind of a noble job. Punishing the bad guys, the two of them named this case a campaign to punish the weak. At that moment, Uikom's father called, so Junki snatched the phone and said that in addition to what your father told you to do, you have to do what you want. Kiom cursed and you were crazy, so Junki challenged you to dare to hit me. Uikom's face was tense like a rope, so Junki apologized and returned the phone to him. When Uikom left, a young man held out a bucket of water to thank him. It turned out that this was a second grader at the same school. After the incident of beating the cardinal the day before, they didn't dare to bully him anymore, so he came to thank his benefactor. Seeing that, Junki stood by and smiled and said that the kind of idiots who stand at the top of the school like Uikom have no compassion. They beat to die after tired school, listened to their father's words and didn't love anyone, and then Junki chased that young man away. Closing one more sentence, I must have looked at the wrong person. After hearing those words, Uikom didn't say anything and quietly left. That night, Uikom was taken by his father to meet the professors so that tomorrow the road of study and fame will be covered with a red carpet. The children of their family are also studying for the medical school exam, and they have already passed. The father said that you should go there and make friends and learn from the experience. Seeing his child obedient, he smiled brightly as if he had just received a Harvard scholarship. He met both the director and the director of the center, an elderly middle-aged woman with a cute daughter who was easy to marry. Here, all people have blood in the academic world. Then there was a professor who introduced his son as a male pig. This guy shook hands as if he was campaigning for the student general council. Who would have thought that behind that moral appearance was a person who used to pour boiling water on his classmates? What's more shocking is that it has also won an award and then appeared on TV. Talking about how he used to have an injury in his leg, he came up with the idea of a smart wheelchair for people with disabilities. After listening, everyone admired and said that this guy is the right kind of guy who learns to buy and is good at studying. Then Oh Ki-om was introduced to the pig, but instead of shaking hands, he asked directly, "How are you now?" Because Song Boom is a victim of pigs. The question made the pig stunned as if he had been kicked around the bridge. Ki-om also added another blow to the school violence case that he was involved in. The father heard that it was just a rumor. Then Oh Ki-om just let go of the sentence. There was another video. "But Dad, does it sound reasonable for a person to put pressure on people with disabilities but make others disabled?" The father saw the problem, so he dragged the Ki-om out of that place. Meanwhile, Ki-om's mother is telling the psychiatrist about her eldest son committing suicide in that room. His mother was frustrated because she didn't understand the distress signals her son had left behind, and that regret will follow her for the rest of her life. Below, Oh Ki-om was scolded and slapped by his father for speaking in a rebellious manner. He tried to explain to his father, but he didn't listen. He also said that talented people have to suffer from rumors, but they want to live cleanly. Then he told his son to study pig upside down. Don't run after this and that cause anymore, even force Oh Ki-om to come back and apologize to the pig. But he replied that he didn't want to be a rotten person in the middle like that. "I don't want to be like my brother." Hearing that, the father blushed angrily and slapped Oh Ki-om once, because his son dared to argue with him today, so he left. Within his mind the unquenched pain of his brother who committed suicide just a month after passing the doctor's degree, and left in his mother's heart a wound that could not be healed. That night the family of 3 had a place for each of them. Oh Ki-om sat alone at the bus stop like a disoriented. When it rained, he didn't bother to walk in the rain as if he was drifting away with his thoughts. Finally he stopped in front of the junkie's house. He wanted to invite his friend to go catch pigs upside down. Meanwhile, in another place, the pig and his accomplices were looking for a new object to bully. The victim was hiding in the toilet this time. It's a good idea. When he was pulled out, Dunggan was punched in the head by a pig, causing him to fall down. That night, Dunggan climbed to the rooftop, standing by the side, rolling with a desperate look that wanted to end it all. But in the end, he didn't dance. He could only hug his face and cry like a broken man, but the tragedy did not stop. Dunggan was then taken away by the pigs face down, and they beat his counsel so much that they couldn't stand. The more they avoided, the harder they hit them, as if they were hitting them for pleasure, not for their faces. And then, in the midst of that, in the cold dark scene, 2 red-masked shadows came out of the corridor like 2 ghosts. It was Junkie and Wikiong, and the 2 of them appeared to teach those bastards an unforgettable lesson.